Good evening, everybody, and welcome. It's good to see so many of you, that so many of you have been able to come out on this cold night and see me up in space here. It's our chairman, John, unfortunately can't be with us tonight. He's quite well, but he's just busy with something that was unavoidable. So you have to put up with me for a little while, but not for long. It has been a busy couple of months for the Society. We've been busy making representations to the city and indeed county councils on our Streets Are Ours campaign, which seeks to get people to take notice that our streets do need attention, that there's been a lack of maintenance for various reasons, some good reasons, some maybe not so good, and weeds and buddleias and brambles are taking over our public spaces. And I'm really pleased to be able to report that there's been a great deal of improvement, but there's still a long way to go. So we are keeping up the momentum. We are continuing the dialogue with both the local authorities, and hopefully we'll have some more good news later in the year. But it is an ongoing process and it's kept us very busy. The planning scrutiny groups always, there's always a heavy workload there. We've looked at the usual things, student housing and the perceived oversupply of it. Some big items such as the proposed Aldi at Scotforth. All these things are ongoing and we're in correspondence with the City Council, with the planners and others on that. But the main reason you're here isn't to listen to me. It's to listen to our Chief Executive, who's been very kindly come to talk to us. Kieran Keane graduated apparently many years ago from Durham University. I don't think it can be that long ago because he looks like a mere lad to me, but for 20 years, he worked for Places for People, the well-known National Housing Association, which of course have properties in our area. He's a chartered accountant. He joined the City Council in 2017 and became Chief Executive in 2019. And now over to you, Kieran. Thank you for coming.
Thank you. So hopefully the technology will behave itself. Just get this working. Right, there we go. Well, good evening, everybody. This is a rare event for me because normally I don't get asked to talk to people about what I do. It's probably a mysterious, hidden in the shadows job for many people. But I'll take you through what happens and what the life of the Chief Executive is about. And it's probably very different in each council, but I'll just click on the next slide. So hopefully this will all work. Yes, there it goes. So a little bit about me and how I got here, how I came to be Chief Executive, and probably spend most of the time talking about the role. And what I've tried to do is break it down into the various elements, take you through all that, and then leave some time at the end for questions. So I'm going to press on if it's okay, because it continues to be a very busy week. So I'll plow on through, and then, but by all means, happy to explore further matters and talk at the end. So, in my biography there, I'm probably not the usual candidate for being a Chief Executive, in that I didn't start as in the municipal rates department at 14 and a half and worked my way up. Had a very, well, a different career in the sense that qualified as an accountant, had roles as an audit manager across different sectors, really. Spent some time at Anglian Water, the time when they'd just been privatised, and then they went off and bought companies abroad and then wondered why the heck they'd done it. And so I had the quite interesting job of whizzing off across the world to see what the heck was going on. So that was quite an interesting time. And then having gone to, if I dare say it, from Yorkshire down to Cambridgeshire, and then came back up to Lancashire, which has been my home since 1997. and joined an organisation which in those days was called North British Housing, and stayed with them for the best part of 20 years. And the reason why I didn't leave there was because it was, you didn't need to, in the sense that opportunity arose in that organisation as it grew and developed and expanded. So I went through a series of jobs, culminating in about 2009-10, where I became a group director for the whole operation, firstly in operations and then in corporate services. But as that organisation grew, whilst it has a massive presence in the north, it was becoming far more London-centric. And I think the time came where I just about had enough of going up and down the West Coast main line once or twice a week. So moved on from there in 2017, and a call came through one day saying, would I be interested in a chief executive role? So I thought, well, look at it, give it a go. And trotted off up to Lancaster and met with Susan Parsonage, who was the chief executive at the time. And she was looking for somebody to bring that sort of perhaps financial, commercial background to things. Things were beginning to happen. At that time, it was the time when British Land were talking about developing on what was called Canal Corridor North and all that going on, etc. And there was quite a big imperative internal financial resilience for councils, because as government funding reduced, councils were having to look for how they could supplement their income. So I came along and got into the job and really enjoyed it and stayed for a bit longer. And then the bit of the serendipity that happened and why I call myself the accidental chief executive, and that's the title I'll use when I write my semi-fictitious autobiography. Susan decided to go back down south to a job with the Unitary, and I agreed to mind the shop for about 3 months whilst I recruited a chief executive. However, 3 years later, I'm still here because the new administration asked me to stay on, and that's what I did. So it's been a really, really interesting and fascinating time, challenging at times, but absolutely a real eye-opener, a real privilege to be able to be part of an organisation that works so widely across across the community, across the district, etc. So that's been a really interesting 3 years as chief executive. Why I say it's been a really interesting 3 years? Because it's about to come to an end, not in any disastrous sense. I am hanging up my boots at the end of March because I want to now pursue a less demanding life after 42 years of working. But I'm sure we'll be appointing a very competent successor to move things on. So moving on fairly quickly, let's talk about the role. So I'm sure many of you have been to Lancaster Town Hall. And if you go into the council chamber there, council chamber that sadly isn't used very often these days because we have 60 councillors and there's only room for about 30 odd councillors in Lancaster. But as you will see, there are, I think, only 15 chief executives since 1837. 1837 is a significant date, yes, primarily because Queen Victoria came to the throne, but that was the time when local government reorganisation really started the proper sort of municipal approach that we know now. It was a little bit grace and favour and fiefdomish before that, and a lot of that was tidied up by legislation around that time. So a bit like the Queen and the Prime Ministers, I think the Victoria had 4 and a bit chief executives, and you can see a lot of them were doing 20 odd years. Well, it'd be unusual for that to happen today because in the way careers work, you're probably in your 30s or 40s before you get appointed and then dander off again when you're about 60. So it does tend to recycle itself these days. Much more people stay for 3 or 4 years, then they move on to somewhere different or they move to somewhere bigger. So in about 6 months' time, the craftsman will come along and they will put a date after my name of 22 and insert a new name on there. And I'm very, very proud and love to take family and friends to see that because it's something I'm very proud of and to be part of a little bit of history of the place. So talking about the role in particular, and I'm trying not to send you to sleep here at all, but I think it's important just to set out why you exist and why this role exists. And it actually, in a sense, the chief executive role is a description of what you do. The actual role in statute is called the head of paid service. And the little bit of detail I'm going to put there, Local Government Act 1989, that essentially obliges every council to designate a head of paid service. There are 3 statutory officers that you must have in legislation. That's the head of paid service, the monitoring officer, who's a lawyer, and he's effectively policing, making sure that democracy and process and the constitution is properly adhered to. And then what we call a Section 1.5 officer, who's normally the chief financial officer or the financial director. These are in addition to their, what you might call the day jobs of being an accountant or being a lawyer. These are specialist officers that attach to those roles, and they're enshrined in legislation. Really important, because I think you'll appreciate, and those of you who go back a long way will remember Polson and those sorts of issues. There were issues to do with corruption in local government, particularly to do with development, then issues to do with finance and accounting and all those sorts of things. So that combination of statutory officers are key to good governance. So the chief executive is what most people are known as, is effectively a managing director, but your legal role is being the head of paid service. So in a sense, you're the head of the civil service for the council. It's the same principle. The key difference is you're there to respond to all councillors, not just whoever the ruling party or parties are, which is slightly different from how it works in central government. So just a couple of slides on what the elements of the role, what those elements are. So I think they break down into those areas of operations, what you might call the day-to-day stuff. Democratic in terms of the engagement with, working with, servicing the needs of our elected members. We have 60 councillors, as you may well know. Then there's the whole external relationships in terms of who you deal with, external bodies, institutions, government, etc. And particularly for Lancaster, there's a ceremonial element. That's what makes it a really interesting job. Some councils are very much, they get on with the day job, but because of our situation in terms of being the county town, our connections with the duchy, we've maintained a degree of ceremony that I think is quite important, and it really reflects our heritage. And then there are, like most jobs, other things you didn't know you were going to do, but you find you are doing, which sometimes comes as a surprise, sometimes turns out to be really interesting. So just pressing on a bit. So what do I actually do? Well, essentially you can summarize it in that first step is delivering the council strategy. So the clear point is here, you have an elected administration, and then you have the paid officers who deliver it. The reality is you work in partnership to deliver those strategies. And if you've ever looked at papers recently, we've just adopted Plan 2030, which is about our strategic intentions up to the year 2030. In reality, is it effectively a managing director role? You're leading a team of, depends whether you talk about full-time or part-time. We probably employ about 800 odd people. We've got about 700 people for the most part across that wide range of services that we deliver. And then, as I said earlier, I'm particularly a bridge with elected members and the key link, and also working with the leader of the council in terms of that shared responsibility for good governance, good delivery, quality service to our citizens. And then another key role for the chief executive is about building partnerships and relationships with all the very many organisations, charities, interested parties, businesses. I'll come on to that in detail, not just across the district, but in terms of national government, fellow councils, etc. So who does all that? Well, we're not a massive team at the top. There's me, and then some names you may recognise. Mark Davis has been with us over 20 years. He's currently Director of Communities and the Environment, and he has a particular strong role in relation to all the initiatives we're pursuing in terms of carbon neutrality, which we're aiming for 2030. Jason Sayers is our Director of Economic Growth and Regeneration. So all those things that I suspect you're probably more interested in. Well, if it's weeds and budleys, it's partly Mark, but I would say it's mainly the county council if it comes to streets and pavements. Jason is at the centre of all things to do with Canal Quarter, South Lancaster Growth Catalyst, etc. And then our Director of Corporate Services, that's all the back office services, finance, legal, democratic services, IT, etc. Not as prominent, not as forward facing, but vital to being able to run the operation effectively, safely and efficiently. So I'm not going to go on at length, but just a couple of examples of probably two sort of different examples of what operational responsibility is. And you all know and love these vehicles, but that is the most often our most visible presence. It's the regular deliveries and collection, the regular collection of refuse from both domestic properties and businesses. During COVID, we felt that was really important. You know, like you get this story about, you know, if Radio 4's still going, there's probably not been a nuclear war yet and that sort of thing. Well, we're really important that we kept that normality and we were always turning up and we were always delivering on what we needed to do. Interesting challenge on COVID. In those early days when things were really bad, you couldn't send a crew out in the vehicle. So you had to send a driver out and then the rest had to follow and walk behind it. And we've got better at it now with glass screens and good practice, etc. But it really was tough in those early days maintaining that service. Just a few of these, but interesting factoids here. 25 refuse vehicles, 65,000 residential locations and 1,500 trade customers, over 250,000 miles driven. And you know, there's 7.6 thousand tons of garden waste, 34,000 tons of it's a big operation, and it does for the most part tend to work like clockwork. But we don't rest on our laurels with this. We're doing a lot of things to do with technology. For example, we've got a lot of our bins are chipped now. So rather than going regularly and finding it's empty or full, if it's full, you'll be annoyed because it's overflowed. If it's empty, it's a wasted journey. So we have chips that now predict when that bin's about to be full, and we then predict schedule our collections based on that. So a lot going on behind the scenes, and what we're really proud of, we've got 2 brand new full-size electric heavy goods vehicles for the refuge fleet joining us very shortly, and that will be the start of many. The majority of our small van fleet is already electric, as are all our pool cars. So we're moving quite quickly on that. The other side, so that you might say that, you know, that's the operations side where Mark is. Then you've got the longer term activity, and just a couple of examples again that you'll know very well. Canal Quarter, and I recall when I first came, we were in negotiations with British Land about that site. It started to become very apparent that the commitment for the council would be quite excessive, and also the whole retail situation was tanking at the time. So that was, we moved on from there to the whole 9 principles of how we would deal with Canal Quarter in terms of that mixed use. You probably may have a view that it takes a long time to achieve things, but you have to go through so many processes in terms of master planning consultation, and we're at that point now where things can begin to happen within the next 12 months. You probably have been buried somewhere if you've not heard the good news on Eden North in terms of planning permission granted just over a week ago. So that's a key milestone now. The council has probably done everything it could do to enable this project in terms of support, in terms of land availability, and in terms of planning. And we've worked very well and solidly and collegiately with the county, the LEP and the university now for the last 4 years or so. And I'm not a betting man, but it will happen. It's just when it happens. So we've just got to be a little bit patient, and I'm sure that will come through in the near future. And we're all very aware of just those great benefits, those wider benefits that will accrue from that successfully being established in Morecambe. So that's a quick summary of the operational stuff. And when you're a chief executive, it's a bit like I liken it, some people say cynically, you're accountable for everything and responsible for nothing. Well, it's not quite true that, but you have experts who are getting on with all those various strands of delivery. And I think the nearest analogy I can draw is it's a little bit like, I'm sure the Hafner Orchestra would disagree, but it's probably like being a conductor. You're not playing the instruments, you're coordinating the whole thing, you're orchestrating the whole thing. You're trying to make a decent sound come out, and that's the sort of metaphor I would use for that. And then you've got the whole democratic side of things. And that's what makes it different, essentially, from running a company or other excuse me, organization. It is a democratic organization, and those processes are followed in terms of budgets and planning and strategy and intention over 12 months. Excuse me. So how does it work in Lancaster? Some of you may be very familiar with this, other people might not be, but it's what's called the cabinet model. There are two ways you can operate a council. You can either have a committee system, which is the traditional way it used to exist in the past. So you'll have a revenues committee, a finance committee. I mean, some you still have to have like planning because they're statutorily necessary. But the way this works is very similar to government. So our portfolio holders are effectively the equivalent of a minister. So you have a certain area of responsibility, and then they're supported by officers within the council. How does all that work? Well, it's all the stuff you can, if you ever go on our website, you see regular council meetings every month, a cabinet meeting every month, and all the various committees, some to deal with specific aspects like planning, licensing, those sorts of things, and some to make sure we've got good governance. So we have the Overview and Scrutiny Committee and the Budget and Planning Committee, and they are members of the council, are not part of the governing arrangements, so they sit quite separately. It's effectively a sort of auditing of what goes on to check people are compliant or sticking to the strategies, are following the constitution, etc. And a particular key role that's probably a chief executive's and no one else's is working with the leader. To make it work well, it's a shared task. The leader being a politician, and me being a paid employee. But to make it work well, it's this bridge. It's this. If you were doing a Venn diagram, there's a bit that merges between the paid service and the elected members in the middle, and that's what we concentrate on, about how policy might be shaped, where directions might be feeding back on what the members' views are, what are the issues in delivery, and so on. And if you can establish a good working relationship, that makes for much more successful delivery across. I mean, as you will be aware, there is no overall majority in Lancaster. The cabinet is made up of a mix of different parties, and so you naturally will get different views emerging. So part of that task is to help manage that, so you can reach a consensus, move on and deliver things, etc. Another key part of it is the whole elections process. It's gone quiet now, but we had a surfeit of it with European elections, and the chief exec can be, and usually is, but doesn't have to be, the acting returning officer. I was for most of the period. I've handed over the role now in anticipation of me leaving until we get a new chief executive. When you watch the TV on an election night for a general election, you will get somebody standing up at the front and saying, I am the acting returning officer, and you find that they all are, and you probably think, well, what happened to the real guy? Are they all ill at the same time? It's not that, it's a fact of the way legislation works. The actual returning officer for a general election is the Lord Lieutenant of the county. So everybody else is an acting returning officer working on his behalf, and that's why that works. And the other bit that goes with that is the electoral registration officer, making sure everybody who wants to be and should be is on the electoral register, and that's pretty critical if you're going to have an effective democratic system. So you all probably recall, just before Christmas, great timing, 2019, there was a general election. But I'd just like to share with you, these are probably the interesting bits that some of you may know about, but others may not. It all looks very sort of, this could be back 200 years, but you are actually served a writ, and it comes to us. And this is what technically causes you, well, you're asked to cause an election to be held. And of course, we get two of those because we have two constituencies that we deal with. And that is so important that the most senior person in the post office and the sorting office, you know, the sort of regional manager or whatever, he actually personally walks across to the town hall and delivers that personally because it's so important. So that's what goes on behind the scenes that most people never see. Of course, that then starts a whole planning. It works very well, but there's the whole logistics, the whole thing to do with polling stations, transport, security, etc., making sure people are legitimately registered, have paid their deposits, have not broken any rules as a whole. And I can't say I'm the expert. Our elections people are the real experts. An amazing experience though to be involved in it. So on that day in 2019, it started at 7 a.m. and it finished for me when I left at 5 a.m. and finally walked back to the auction mark car park and got in my car at 5 a.m. the next day after the election. And you spend your day going out to polling stations, seeing how it's going, checking that things are being done correctly. So you get round about 20 or 30 of the places and then have a little rest in the evening. Then it all kicks off at 10 o'clock and then everybody gets cracking. And then we have to wait, because we do Lancaster and Fleetwood, we have to wait for some of the boxes to come from Wire Council, who get it all ready for us. Then it has to come over on a truck and somebody has to ride shotgun and make sure nobody interferes with the boxes. And it all comes up here and everybody counts, and you have to do two things. You have to check that the number of votes that everybody thinks they've put in matches with what you've got before you even start counting who got the votes. So it's quite a complicated process, but you get to a point and there he is, his nibs at the microphone at probably 4 o'clock in the morning, announcing the result from Morecambe and Loonsdale. It is quite a privilege to feel part of history like that, though, and it's a memory one will take away. And then of course you've got county elections, which we facilitate, our own local elections, which are every 4 years. We don't do thirds here, so it's what's known as an all-out council. Everybody's up for election if they choose to stand again at the same time. So just now thinking about the external relations, and this is a particularly critical role again for a chief exec. That whole thing about building and maintaining professional relationships right across the piece, and not both within the district and outside. And the examples that are given are probably not exhaustive. There's probably some key organisation that I work well with that I've not mentioned, but it gives you an idea. Businesses generally, engagement with them, with the chamber and with the two bids, talking about all the issues to do with how businesses are working, how towns are working, how traffic affects things, car parking, you name it, we talk about it and we engage with our peers there. And then you run the whole two MPs to deal with. MPs will both deal with you in terms of wanting to be briefed on things generally and issues, but also in their constituency role, they will write in with issues that their constituents are raising, and we make sure we deal with it promptly and get a response. We work with other councils as well. As you know, we have a shared service with Preston on council tax. But we also compare notes and sometimes we help each other out. It's been particularly prevalent during COVID, that shared, everybody pushing in the same way together. Much more, and I think increasingly so, Lancaster sort of getting a stronger voice with government, particularly what was the Ministry of Housing and Local Government, now DLUC. Great relationships with both the universities. It is the University of Cumbria, but it has a massive site in Lancaster, and an excellent relationship with the Vice-Chancellor and the Pro-Vice-Chancellors at the University of Lancaster. Similar with the ports and Seatruck and the owners of the port. And there's a whole range there. This is the final slide, but you know, EDF with the power stations, the NHS particularly, because if we're talking about health and prevention, we're not clinicians and we're not health professionals, of course we're not, but we can play a role in terms of amenity, in terms of what our our leisure centres can offer. There's a lot of prescription goes on now for exercise rather than drugs, those sorts of things. So we begin to play an increasing role in that. Great relationship with the Duchy, Lancaster and Morecambe College, and with particularly with our local police, who really do engage with us very well. And then finally, just to give you an idea of the breadth, charities, the Environment Agency, particularly with the Cape Road Flood Scheme and all that's been progressed there, emergency planning, the areas of the AOMBs and the National Park, particularly a little bit of the Yorkshire Dales now comes, National Park comes into Lancaster. And then just to add to interest and make the job even probably more interesting, there's his Nibs in his Hogwarts outfit, but that's what we do occasionally. When we hold full council, it's all still a bit COVID sort of safeguarded, but in normal times you would have a mace bearer walking in, the hammer is tapped and the mayor walks in full regalia and I troop in next to him. But I also get to where these are the sort of ceremonial things you get involved with. Every May there is May making, and the chief executive is the continuous presence, and it is called May making, and you actually create that role of the next person being mayor, and it's a very pleasant council meeting in the afternoon where people are proposed, and it will be one party will propose and a very different political party will second it, and it's a very collegiate event and very pleasant. I also once a year create Freeman under very old precedent and legislation. That's different to Freedom, where that tends to be rare and perhaps granted to the crew of a ship or something like that. But we do create the Freeman of Huntingdon. And then you go to things like the shield hanging for the High Sheriff, and you troop into the castle and there's a new shield each time one of those is appointed. And then you represent sometimes the council at civic ceremonies if the mayor can't do it. I was very honoured and privileged to go on a Royal Navy ship some time ago to represent the district there. So those are the sorts of ancillary things you do. And then I think, the other key bits is you sometimes have to step in and step up, and that one has been interesting because I'm very proud to say that the council did reinvent itself in about 3 days, and it focused on making sure vulnerable people were being looked after, making sure businesses were supported through the grant, and maintaining frontline services. So at one point, over 300 people were doing different jobs to what they were normally doing. I think we phoned over 56,000 people over that time. We had the work with the food bank, and we opened up Salterix. Then it went into the platform, paying all the government. Our museums manager is now one of the world's leading experts on government grant payments, and she just turned 2 and did it. And there are many people like that. Excuse me, but we did keep our frontline services running. Some things got a little bit logjam, but for the most part, it brought out the best in people. It brought out the best in local government, and a lot of politics were parked for the greater good of the community. There's a thing called the Lancashire Resilience Forum, which it's a group of all those people who are relevant normally to a catastrophe or disaster. So it's police, fire, health service, highways, local government. It normally convenes, say, if there was a plane crash or a major flood like Desmond. But that LRF has been up and stood up and been running now for nearly 2 years, which is very unusual. But I found myself, you don't know what's going to happen to you. And I found myself a phone call one day, and I became, an interesting title, a bronze commander in this whole setup. And I suddenly got responsibility for importing PPE from the Far East to keep our homes, our care homes supplied. Each chief exec in the county took on different roles, and that's the one I took on. And I worked with a senior police officer, senior army officer, and we ended up through a series of cooperation and good fortune. We started bringing stuff in via Heathrow ourselves and bringing it into the county with the help of the fire service for logistics, etc. An amazing experience where you have to think on your feet and do things quickly just for making sure we protected the health of the vulnerable and those who were working with them. Thankfully, things have calmed down now. Whilst it's not perfect, we do seem to be coming on the other side. But I think the point there is we did plough on. We didn't have any issues of, oh, that's not my job. Everybody just got on with it to make sure we could do what we could do to make it work. You know, things like the Hope Church, where they had a system for matching volunteers with need, and everybody contributed in different ways. So I hope that gives you a little bit of flavour of what goes on. And I hope it's not sent you to sleep too early tonight. So that's a quick canter through the life of me as the accidental chief executive. So thank you. And if you have any questions.
Thank you, Kieran. That was fascinating. I don't think any of us knew the full extent of your role. And what we've heard is very impressive. It's also good to hear such optimism about Eden. I think all of us want to embrace this and encourage this development and this major investment in the area, which will, of course, bring big change. And also, I think all of us would agree that Lancaster City Council's record on COVID has been exemplary. I think from what I hear from other local authorities, Lancaster's done particularly well on that particular issue, and I think this will be remembered for many years. Kieran is quite keen to answer questions. He is unable to answer questions on policies or individual planning matters and things like that, but I know that he would welcome to, some nice bright questions from the nice bright people who I see on my screen.
Thank you very much, Kieran. That was a really interesting talk and lovely to hear you again. My question, something that puzzled me since I came back to the district. So the sort of Lancaster City area is unique within the district because we don't have a city council or a parish council in the centre of Lancaster. Waltham has its town council, the rural districts have their parish council. Why does the centre of Lancaster not have its own lower tier council?
Interesting question. I'm not an expert, so I may need to be corrected. My understanding is there is nothing barring it being created. Not all, it's called parishing, and not all of the district is parished, as they say. So you'll get tracts of the district where there is no representation at that lower level. Now, I suspect, and I don't know this, that when we had local government reform in 1974 after the Rexborough-Moores report, clearly Morecambe lost its own council, didn't it? And it was combined. Now, I suspect that, and I don't know this, but that might have been a motivation for looking for more local representation. But I don't know that's the case. My understanding, and I'd have to check that out further, is that I don't think there's anything preventing a lower tier authority being created. I think it's just never happened. There's probably some expert sitting there who knows the right answer, so we'll see on that one, but I'll check that out for you.
Okay, thanks, Kieran. That's one to explore. I'd be really interested to know.
Yeah, I'll look into that. I'll talk to our legal people and see.
Alan Sandham has got his hand up as well.
Thank you, David. Thank you. My internet connection has been very poor this evening. I don't know whether you'll hear what I'm saying.
I can hear you fine, thank you.
But 2 points, please. One is external relationships, Kieran. And you may very well have said this, and I didn't hear it. But the important links that ought to continue and have been for many decades with what are now both our universities, established in 1964, and what contribution they make to the city generally. So just a comment and an invitation for you to say something about that. And the other question is, please, when will Lancaster Town Hall reopen?
Yes.
Thank you.
So the first one, it might have been your internet connection, but I did deal with at some length about both the fact that Cumbria's got a large site, and we have that relationship with Julie in particular with that. And also I mentioned the excellent relationship with Andy Schofield, the Vice-Chancellor, and particularly Sue Black, the Pro-Vice-Chancellor. So I did cover that. In terms of when there's the town hall reopening, it is gradually reopening. Part of the issue is we've had to manage the vaccination centre issue, because it's still there, and there's a degree of security around that. But we are proposing to open it for ceremonial events, for the Ashton Hall to become available, and for a reception presence in the very near future, as things are calming down now. So that's imminent.
Good. Anyone else? Roger, is that you again?
James has got his hand up at the
Oh,
moment.
sorry, James. Sorry, yeah.
Okay, thanks. Kieran, I'd be interested in your perspective on devolution. The earliest devolution deals are now probably about 10 years old, and those areas that managed to get a devolution deal have benefited significantly, both in terms of additional funding and in devolution of powers. As I understand it, over the last decade, it's been impossible to arrive at a political consensus across Lancashire about what an arrangement might look like. And more recently, it did appear that peace had broken out and a consensus appeared. But I also understand that the apple cart was slightly upset by a number of the Labour groups across the county who felt that the proposals were insufficiently ambitious. And then when the Levelling Up White Paper was published last week, there were a number of areas identified which would be, if you like, the next stage of devolution, and Lancashire was not one of those. So I'd just be interested in your perspective as an insider of where you think we're going on that, and how optimistic you might be about us finally getting one at some stage.
My own view is that the signs are very positive. I think the cooperation during COVID helped a lot, of the politicians working together. But you're right, I'm not a politician, so this is my perspective, of course, and that goes with that health warning, that there does seem to be a degree of cooperation and collegiality that might not have existed before, because all the leaders agreed on a way forward, and that paper was taken to every council, the county, the 2 unitaries, and the 12 districts. Yes, this is politics, isn't it? And people will have different views on different things, and I'm reluctant to comment on the detail, except to say, I think actually still everybody believes in the general thrust of where everybody's trying to get. Things had to be done within a fairly quick time frame, and I think that paper was never intended to be the final polished ask, but indicative of what might be worked on. So the question that, and it's all, it's there to be read, or you can read it, so I'm not giving any secrets away. It was about, do you think some of these structures would be good for governance, and are you prepared to work together to work on something like this, rather than definitely this, I think. So that's the first couple of bits of your question. Then the white paper came out. There isn't a panic about the fact that someone named in Lancashire wasn't on it. We have that assurance directly from Michael Gove, actually, that those were the ones who made the first applications for the first round of levelling up, for all sorts of good reasons. Most, if not any, Lancashire council, I think they wanted to prepare better cases for the next rounds. So I don't think it's about missing boats or anything like that. This is going to be a fairly lengthy process. So there is an argument that says possibly now that we know about the white paper, the way the recommendations were styled might not be quite appropriate to what's going to be happening according to the white paper, but you don't have a crystal ball. But I think there's sufficient goodwill, sufficient good intent to move this forward, because I suppose those who have got their act together, and if you look at what's happening in Liverpool and Manchester, and it's different for those places. They've been metropolitan counties and unitaries for many, many years, and they have a long history of working together, like the Greater Manchester Authority Association, what it was in the old days. And Liverpool similarly, they tend to operate a bit of a mothership satellite approach. So I think that demonstrates what you can get if you get your act together, and I think that's the what's been heard now in Lancashire, that something like that needs to happen in terms of a coherent and well articulated business case. So I think that will continue, and I think there is the opportunity to make a really decent bid, and I don't think the tap has been turned off. And it will have its moments along the way, because that's politics, but I think there's sufficient good intent to drive that forward.
Thank you, Kieran.
Yes, it seems as though recently the City Council is moving into property development with the purchase of frontier land, the Wilko store, and the Parkway car park. What is the rationale behind this?
Well, no, with the car park, we always owned it. It was the operators who were, so it reverted to us due to a change in issues to do with the organisation that was operating. Frontierland is what you call a strategic regeneration purpose. It stood there for many years, so now there's an opportunity to do something with it, and there's probably 1,000 views and 1,000 people wanting to make an offer and everything else. So we need to take that calmly and thoroughly to work through what those possibilities are. But councils have always done these sorts of things, which is about acquiring some assets that will help in terms of regeneration, in terms of bringing back life to places. And there is no secret agenda about what might be done with Frontierland. It is an open debate, but it's a space that could be well used for many different purposes, but there needs to be a lot of consultation on it. Why do we buy Wilko's? Well, we're not big investors in property, though we all have owned property for a long time. But if you're going to be financially resilient in the face of reducing government subsidy, you do need to find other sources of income. And small pepper potting of a few properties give you some certainty of income over time. The trick is not to do it in too many places and not to too great an extent, really. So that's the approach we've taken. It's compared to many councils, a very, very limited investment.
Thank you for that. That's reassuring. Yeah. Anyone else? Yes, Roger.
As landlord of Wilko's, will you insist that they return their glass windows to clear glass and not put shelving backing onto the windows? Because that was the original planning.
I can't really get into that level of detail. It's not what I was here to do tonight, really. But it probably depends on what the lease says.
All right. Okay.
But I'm probably not here to answer that level of detail, and I probably don't know the answer, so I'm not going to make it up.
Thank you. Anyone? Can you see anybody, David? You've got a bigger screen.
If I may, in the shopping centre, as you come down China, as you cross the junction with Common Garden Street, I really am on a campaign to make it look like the shops are open, not shut, because those blank type windows that you get on that corner, I think they're a really poor advert for the life of the town. But yes, the council doesn't have a magic wand. You can't go and insist they do something in their window displays. It's not part of legislation or planning policy to deal with that. So it's about persuasion and influence there.
Right. No one else? No.
None further at the moment I can see, please.
Oh, David, yes. Sorry, David.
No, there's no more that I can see, please.
No more that you can see. Okay. Thank you so much, Kieran. I think we're all much wiser now about the workings, especially of your role, which seems so incredibly complex. I don't know how one brain can take it all in. I certainly couldn't. So, yeah, best of luck for the future, of course, because we know that you're leaving us soon. We hope you're not leaving the district, and we hope that you'll make some kind of contribution to society in whatever role the future has for you.
Hopefully something will come up that can put something back in a different way, and that would be very nice. And thank you for listening tonight. It's been really interesting to be able to have that discussion with you.
Thank you, Kieran.
No, okay. Can we give you
yes,
a real thanks? It's been very, very enjoyable Very, very interesting. And thank you for taking the time.
You're very welcome. Thanks very much.
I think everybody enjoyed tonight, Kieran.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Well, that's
That was
pleasing
good.
to know. Thanks very much. So I'll leave you all now. Thanks then.
Right. Good night, and
Bye-bye.
thanks again,
Bye.
Kieran. Thank you ever so much.
Well, good night, everybody, and thank you for coming.